God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. The angel realized that a terrible chain of events was now set in motion. He watched as Adam and Eve defied their God, and now these first parents of the human race would have to leave their home behind. The angel stood and took his place at Eden's gate, and in all bright array the cherubim descended to help him guard the entrance. Eve and Adam turned away in grief. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest and providence their guide. They, hand in hand with wandering steps and slow through Eden, took their solitary way. This angel stood watch at the gate, and he knew that paradise was closed. And as the story is told and retold, according to subsequent Jewish legend, the angel's name was Gabriel. This angel's name was Gabriel, and paradise was closed. Ladies and gentlemen, today's sermon is about hell. At least it starts off that way. Deacon Hall got to speak to you last week about joy, and now you get hell time with Father Pollock. How nice for you. The four traditional themes of the Advent Sundays are centered on the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. This is easy to see if you go back and look at all the texts that have been coming through the daily office in this season. Or you can go look at the Advent hymns we've been singing lately, the ones that tell us that Messiah will see deep wailing on the last day, or that Israel is mourning in lowly exile, the holly-jolly stuff. So I hope this sermon in its own way can follow that traditional Advent course. Darkest before dawn, realistic about evil, with a small spark of hope at the end. Our branch of the church seems to have been confused about hell for some time, or at least put off enough by the idea that a thoroughgoing investigation is rarely attempted. Our usual train of non-thought goes something like this. The Bible says a lot of scary stuff about hell, or so we've heard. Dante ramped things up quite a bit with the Inferno. John Milton did some more in Paradise Lost. Jonathan Edwards came along then and told us what it must be like to be hung out like a spider, a loathsome insect, dangling over a wide and bottomless pit full of the fire of wrath. We heard about all of this and said, that sounds a lot like the guys who wear sandwich boards and yell at pedestrians through megaphones downtown. No thanks. Not interested. It's important to see, though, that this is one area, ironically, where our branch of the church has not decided to bend over backward to appease the spirit of our age. Our decision never to talk about hell is really in sharp contrast to the mood of pop culture. You think about the endless stream of horror films that come out every year, the ones about demonic possessions, exorcisms, hauntings. Wikipedia listed 111 movies that came out this year, not to mention all of the TV series on the major streaming platforms. I feel like Netflix is always trying to get me to watch that latest Paranormal Rager. You know what I'm talking about? So if our branch of the church has decided that talking about eternal damnation is gauche, our neighbors seem not to have gotten the memo. Given the never-ending appetite we see for stories about devils, demons, lakes of fire, and the like. Now, I'm sure there's at least someone who won't agree this is ironic at all, or at least prefer a different interpretation of the data. Sure, this person says, of course there's a lot of interest in the occult or the paranormal these days. It sells movie tickets. You know what else sells movie tickets? Werewolves, vampires, giant robots from outer space who like to box each other. You aren't suggesting this means anything, are you? My imaginary debate partner's point is well taken, though he seems to be a little impatient with me. Our darker tastes in entertainment don't, of course, necessitate anything about the existence of a hell, But what I am saying is that this seemingly innate fascination means that many of us dismiss the idea far too quickly. The Atlantic published a 6,000-word article this month in their December issue called American Exorcism: How Priests Are Fielding More Requests Than Ever for Help with Demonic Possession, and a centuries-old practice is finding new footing in the modern world. The article follows the story of a woman named Louisa who allegedly experiences possession. And then the story zooms out to consider what this means for therapeutic and religious caregivers. Louisa, we learn, is a normal, friendly, and open person, but is given to episodes where she screams, pulls out her hair, growls and glares at those around her. Her head flailed from side to side, cocking back and forth at odd angles. In jumbled bursts, she muttered about good and evil, God and the devil. She told the counselors that no one there could save Louisa, talking about herself in the third person. Louisa seemed to vacillate between this unhinged state and her normal self. One minute she would snarl and bare her teeth, the next she would beg for help. It definitely had the appearance that she was fighting within herself, her counselors said. The Atlantic article cites Gallup polls and studies by YouGov which suggest that roughly half of Americans believe demonic possession is real. The percentage who believe in the devil is even higher, and in fact has been growing. Gallup polls suggested that the number rose from 55% in 1990 to 70% in 2007. The article includes portions of an interview with the official exorcist for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Indianapolis, who revealed that he had 1,700 requests for exorcism this year. And though the great majority of those requests are dismissed because psychiatric issues are discovered to be the real problem, there is a minority who do undergo the rites of expulsion. One priest who is deeply involved in the process describes the feelings of those making the request like so. He said it's something visceral, irrational, beyond science, far buried underneath medicine and psychology, this huge fear that these things are true. Even the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, lists a possession-form subtype of identity disorder, acknowledging that many around the world understand their abnormal mental experiences and behaviors in a spiritual way. Pope Francis frequently encourages this perspective, telling the flock that we should not think of the devil as a myth, a representation, a symbol, not as a figure of speech or an idea, but rather as a personal being who assails us. Folks, we need to understand that these people weren't asking for help self-actualizing. They weren't asking for help to manage their workplace anxiety. They were asking priests to help them remove malevolent creatures from their bodies. If the church can't talk about this, who should? Fleming Rutledge, one of the greatest priests and theologians in the Anglican world today, puts it like this. She thinks it's less important that we talk about hell as a place to which one goes. It's more accurate, she says, to describe hell as an oppressive regime of spiritual darkness. Soldiers, for example, tell us that war is hell. And her explanation means that they don't say this by way of analogy, but by way of experience. You can imagine what it must be like for soldiers to see a group of their closest friends erased in an instant by an IED bomb. You can imagine what it must be like to be a journalist embarking on what you thought was a routine expedition, only to be tortured to death in a foreign consulate. I think about my brother's close friend who took her own life this past week, leaving behind a 2-year-old son. For Fleming Rutledge, to experience these things on earth is to peer into the void of the hell mouth. These are to stare into the abyss. So what indeed does any of this have to do with us here on the fourth Sunday of Advent? My friends, one thing Christian theology is quite certain about is that we can't fix it. We can't get rid of hell on our own. I don't know about you, but I'm often tempted to believe that if we could just bring enough democracies into being, if we could just get more people to go to family therapy, if we could just get more people to major in international relations, if we could just get more people to listen to NPR together and be civil afterward, then the mouth of hell would just close itself. World peace would usher in, and Jesus would just pat us on the head and be grateful he didn't need to come back. Quite unlike these delusions of mine, the church is unmistakably clear that we cannot close hell by ourselves. This is a key theme of Advent. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, whose writings many of you studied last year in Sunday school, wrote that a prison cell is a good analogy for Advent. One waits, he says. One hopes, one does this or that, ultimately negligible things. But the door is locked and can only be opened from the outside. Bonhoeffer knew a thing or two about being imprisoned. He knew it in his bones. If hell is real, and if we can't close it, and if Advent is like being in a prison cell whose door can only be opened from outside, if the world is really mourning and lowly exile, what indeed can be done about it? It was in this, our darkest night, always in our darkest night, that a certain peasant girl named Mary set out and traveled quickly to a Judean town in the hill country. She entered the house of Zechariah and greeted her cousin Elizabeth with good news. "Elizabeth," says Mary, likely out of breath, reasonably overwhelmed, "an angel came to visit, and he told me that I'll have a son, and that my son will be called the Son of the Most High. The angel told me that God will give my boy the throne of David, and that his kingdom will never end." Elizabeth, awestruck, soaks in every word. She has a hunch about what it means, and the possibility, the sheer elation of it makes the hairs stand up on the back of her neck. Voice trembling, she might well have asked through quickening breath, "Who told you that? What was the angel's name?" Mary would have replied, the angel's name was Gabriel. Friends, if you're wondering why this time of year, for so many of us, is really just about sitting around for a couple of days, overeating and overdosing on sentimental schlock with our families, if you wonder why so many of us are utterly bored with the church and hearing again about the entrance of a baby whose solemn placid birth is mythic balm for the world's mythic horror, can you really blame anybody for not wanting to come to church? People need to hear, we need to hear, that in 2 days the church is not celebrating something insidiously vague and vapid like the birth of new possibilities or the triumph of family values. In 2 days the church is celebrating the birth of a child whose destiny it is to shut the mouth of hell forever. To knock down every last tyrant off his throne. To lift up the poor from dust. To conquer death itself and become the first fruits, the first crop of a coming resurrection harvest, one which includes all saints. And to have his people, the church, share in that work right now. That's worth getting out of the lounger for, I think. Elizabeth and her cousin are ecstatic, basking in the glory of the news. Elizabeth tells Mary, "Blessed are you, happy are you among women. Blessed, happy is the fruit of your womb." And Elizabeth marvels at how truly fortunate she is. "Who am I," she says, "that the mother of my Lord should visit me?" And what she says next can be taken up by you and me and everybody else. Blessed, happy, fortunate is she who believed there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord. That is, happy are we all who believe God keeps his word. And so, for now, for these next 2 days, we'll wait and we'll watch. We'll watch with Gabriel, we'll watch with Elizabeth, and we'll watch with Mary, who's beginning to feel a certain tremor in her womb.